Okay, welcome. So, I know you've never seen me say this before, but do you have your name tags on? Are your phones off? Please turn those phones off. You know that makes me very unhappy. Okay, make sure, did we all sign in? I bet we did. Remember to clean up after yourself, though you can't bring anything in here anyway, so I don't understand why you got to worry about that. All right, tomorrow, Wisdom Wednesday, one that I would highly endorse considering that's my area of semi-expertise, is on Yamamoto, the famous Japanese admiral, and this is about, in effect, his assassination by the United States Air Force. So, should be a lot of fun. Trivia time. It's unfortunately met its demise, so I'm sorry to say that trivia time will be canceled for the term. The reading group is full, so unless somebody leaves, you're out of luck in joining the reading group. You could start another one. Yeah, good idea. You know, you could read about Japanese history. Maybe I'll start one. Probably get nobody there, but anyway. Well, now, oh, you know what I forgot? I forgot to ask, are there any new OLLI members here? Well, welcome. You're going to have a great time because, quite honestly, this is my absolute favorite class of all the classes at OLLI. You know, there was a James Bond song that was something to the effect that nobody does it better, okay? But anyway, it is now a great privilege to introduce a man who has shed so much light on the dark ages. Now they're actually bright. The one and only Dr. Joseph Kicklighter.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. Thanks, everybody. And welcome back, and welcome to those who are joining us for the first time. My time, hey, Alan, my time goes all the way back to 2015. So, yeah, third year review, you know how that goes. So, I've been kept on. Okay, the ball, yeah, well, 3 year, but not tenure yet, but I'm on my way, if I keep on for the next 4 years, maybe. But I hope that if you've been with me before, you have an idea about how this is going to go, and some of you may even have the book from 2015. And let me say something about this book. It has it all from beginning to end, since we are doing 3 terms on the Middle Ages. It'll take you all the way through. There are a few photographs to help you along, and there are charts and the trees that we all love in history. We've got to have those genealogical charts and so forth. This is a classic book that has been done over and over again. The original author died in 1996, and it was picked up by others to make it more modern. The latest edition, the 11th, can be superseded by the 10th at what I might say a remarkable difference in price for those who are thrifty. And just to note that on Amazon, because they have the 10th edition, and you can imagine in college situations, they will never recommend the 10th. So they are well supplied with them. This, however, is the 11th for the purpose of letting you know how long this venerable book has been around. Frank? Now that speaks a man who's thrifty. So does that include tax or? What about shipping? Yeah, okay. Yeah, Prime, we all know. We're all hooked on Amazon, so we all understand the significance. Medieval history is a course that some of you may have had when you were in school, and understand, well, anybody, you know, with ties to Germany, I'm sure would study a lot of medieval, because that is a very, very important part of medieval civilization, as we're going to talk about. But for many people, as was pointed out, they are the Dark Ages, a term of, I guess, a disparaging nature, which is to say, who would want to study something so boring and insignificant? A hurtful remark to those of us in the field, but you understand that it is not atypical among some people in other fields who say, oh, well, 20th century, that's interesting, but not so much a field that is not very important. However, let me point out at the same time that I was in CVS the other day, you know, picking up medicines and using my extra bucks to save money, doing those kinds of things that one likes to do. And I happened to walk by the magazine section, which is not usually something I would do, but a word caught my eye. Medieval. Medieval. Yes! And realizing it's reached the masses. Everybody is interested. Medieval is just, I mean, yeah, among the cosmopolitans and all of Sports Illustrated. I thought, oh, my people, we're back with we're back. And Frank and Linda, I'm going to contribute this to the library, our Ollie Library.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I want them to understand. It's got beautiful, well, as you would expect from a National Geographic publication, well, it doesn't have too much writing, but it's got a lot of beautiful photographs, because as all of us who have been tourists know, much of what we call Europe today was originally medieval. And the result is that I think the study of medieval history has contributed greatly to the tourist industry. But that is merely a passing mention. Yes, the idea of the Middle Ages is really one that in history we call a construct. And we've all heard that word, I guess, but we've heard it mostly as a verb, haven't we? Not so much as a noun. But in history, we talk about it as a construct because those folks didn't know they were in the Middle Ages. You see, it's like, this is terrible. Why couldn't we have been Roman? You know, that kind of thing. Or, wow, the Renaissance is coming to a world soon. The grandkids are really going to have a better life. But we know that life isn't like that. It is a matter then of going back and studying the past and deciding there was this period that has come to be known as the Middle Age, or ages, I should say. What was it? Well, it literally means the Middle Age, meaning a time between two other periods. And clearly someone had to decide that. And the people who decided it were those who came after. Christians referred to it as the time after the coming of Christ and before the return of Christ. In other words, they did not expect it to be a long period because they were looking for the second coming. So they thought, well, we're living in the Middle Age, and it will be a short time, and then we'll be out of here. As it turned out, though, the extended time meant that the term could be used further, and it was largely by people who believed that they had come out, or were coming out. I shouldn't say they had come out. They were coming out of a dark and dreary time. Because they were people of the so-called Renaissance. That is to say, they believed themselves to be heirs of the Romans, the glorious Romans. Forget Caligula and Nero and all the bad stuff. Just they try to think of the good stuff now. And they thought, in essence, we Italians of this glorious Renaissance are the heirs of the Romans. And they say, but those folks before us, pretty bad. And that was the Middle Age. And they used it in an entirely negative sense. It was a long period, about 1,000 years, give or take, as they say. There's nothing very definite about it. If you were to get a bunch of medievalists together and lock them up and say, okay, when did it begin? And make them come to a conclusion before you let them out. Yeah, and there could be some foul play before that discussion went over, yes. Oh, this becomes quite a big discussion of when did it really start? When did the Roman Empire really end? Because if you ever see the famous Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, that book just goes on and on and on. If you want to say that the empire went on until the 15th century, you will have people who say that, until the fall of Constantinople. That's right. Now, this is the way it's going to look. If you want that green color, you can see that that is the land that is involved. It is not altogether what had been Roman, because we have added to it much of Northern Europe, the Germans, and other peoples. But I think the map shows, even more importantly, the question of religion, the Catholic nature of what we will call medieval. Because it will be Catholic, not Orthodox Christian, or other, as the map puts it, other. But in this case, we are concerned primarily with what is medieval as it evolved. Now, I tried to think of reasons to start all of these different centuries, and if you ever think about this, you could go any of these ways if you wanted to get into some great medieval debate. You think, could it be the legalization of Christianity? You have heard me, some of you have heard me speak about when Christianity went from essentially a minority of individuals who were illegal into a legal, institutionalized state, and then grew by the end of the 4th century to being the state religion. Well, that's very important. I mean, because I'm going to talk about state religion as bad as those of you who went to Catholic school. I mean, you know what it's like, because it's not like it's ever going away. Every Tuesday, I will be bringing in Catholicism one way or another. I mean, it is popes and monks and all sorts of important figures in the Middle Ages. So you can always go with the fourth, but let's hear it for the fifth. Because if I went to a Roman history convention or medieval convention, and you suddenly, in the bar, you're having a drink maybe, and you heard somebody, you're the waiter or something, and you hear somebody say, 476. Oh, I know. And you can imagine the excitement that the whole bar would just, give me a double, man. Here's to 476. Because everyone knows in the medieval world that was the year of the last Western Roman emperor. It doesn't take much to get us excited. So 476, the idea of not having an emperor in the West anymore. And this particular group of lectures will end with that first Roman emperor of the West, Charlemagne. So that's where we will end around, Thanksgiving, whenever this ends. And so that is a good reason, I think, for the 5th century. No more Western emperor for a long time. They will recognize the emperor over in Constantinople, but they don't like him because he's Greek. He's not one of us, Well, how about then let's go Byzantine? And the 6th century will do that. And once there is an empire over in the East and it's Greek in culture, can we say that begins the Middle Ages? Because there's no idea of unity anymore between East and West. There is a separate empire. And as we're going to see in this course, when we get to the Byzantines, there was one last emperor in the 6th century, and Carol, he knew Latin. Yes, he knew his conjugations. Carol, one of our great Ollie members, knows Latin like she knows Anglo-Saxon. Pluperfect passive tenses are no... She's modest. But the fact is that if you have emperors and they can't even conjugate verbs and decline nouns, what's an empire to do? I'll tell you, go Greek. Yeah. And so that means, again, we've got a complete division now between East and West. And they do feel very, very different, which is interesting for us because the Byzantines are very interesting. And finally, and I think very importantly, is the fact that along comes the Muslim faith. And that's going to create a whole new dynamic in this world. And some scholars, as we're going to see, believe that this split East and West completely apart. And of course, it gives Westerners a sort of reason for being. Not in a good way, as we might think, but that idea of, hey, now we've really got somebody we need to fight. Let's all get together. Let's stop killing each other and go kill somebody else. And so, yeah, that's part of, sad, but true in the 7th century. It's sort of like the Islamic world is going to create a whole new dimension of people coming together for the purpose of fighting. We have an enemy now, and so let's go at it. So the idea I'm trying to present here is that depending on what group of medieval people you hang out with, for social occasions, you can get a lot of different versions of how it all begins. But whether or not they agree on this particular issue, there's no doubt that there are characteristics within the Romans of falling apart, a sense in those centuries. Now, you're looking at something that may soon be a historical relic itself, but let's go back to the times, even in Montgomery, when we could, yes, it was a happy time. We could go to our store. I spent money there. I'm just confessing, I'll admit it. I spent more than I should have and had a wonderful time, but it's gone. And so I'm going to mention some books that seem to me books that at various times have been read by a normal, educated populace, not for students, not for scholars, but for educated people who enjoyed the Middle Ages. And some of you may know them. Barbara Tuchman, whom I had the great privilege of meeting, was a great scholar of World War I and other aspects of 20th century history. The Zimmerman telegram is one of my favorites. Yes, even more famously. But in her later years, in the 1970s, she developed an interest in medieval history. She taught herself how to read Latin documents, paleography, and basically a self-taught medievalist. And of that, she came out with a book that became what I think, for a medieval book, was very popular in that market. And I mean the market of regular people that you would see in Barnes & Noble. In fact, I did see it at one in New York. A Distant Mirror, which was popular because she had found out lots of information about a great noble family in France during the 100 Years' War. So she was able to make it come alive. It wasn't anything that was dreary or unpleasant for regular people. And we love the regular people. And they like to read books too. And this book was quite popular in its day, which would be late 70s, early 80s. Another, which made, yes, I can hear more of a buzz about that one, because this was the medieval mystery. I think I read it on a train, because it just went on and on. And it was very entertaining, and I think the movie version was Sean Connery, maybe, was that it? So, again, you do not have to be a medievalist to enjoy it, and it was fairly accurate in terms of their costuming, and you don't want to go into a movie and be too pedantic, but it was entertaining, no doubt about that. This book was one that required a little more effort, and yet I think was well worth it. The historian was a French historian who was fascinated by what you might call what are real people doing. He said, we have too much history about popes and kings, so let's find out what people were doing. So he found this little village way down in southern France near the Spanish border. and he found records of the church institution called the Inquisition. And he used them to find out that in this town, a lot of folks were outwardly Catholic. But when sometimes doors were closed, they became heretics. Yes. In other words, they were living a lie. And this, the promised land of, the priest was having an affair with one of the local ladies, one of the housewives. Scandals. I mean, yeah. It was the Harper Valley of southern France. I mean, these people, but it was fascinating, the level of heresies. You say, well, we want to hear more about that. You will in 2019. So come back, but I'm not telling you anymore because these people were into a doozy, yes. So they were serious heretics. And you see the sheep. How could you be a peasant and not love sheep, right? So we got to have the sheep community. So it's quite an interesting book, though. And look, you got the Washington Post doing the review, and that's for regular people. So, yeah. So it's not at all something that, and it came out with a paperback, too. Hard and paper. So it did very well. Now, this is not medieval, but I just couldn't resist this. Yeah, let me just say, it's the last year of the Truman administration. So that will take you back to 1952. And you will understand, look at all those bicycles, wasn't that something? And you think, gosh, isn't he clever the way he knew that it was 1952? Well, let me tell you how I knew that, because I found out when that movie came out, Last Train from Bombay. And so, nice cars, and see the Pitts Hotel down there, Frank? Okay. So, they're right there on College Street, and we all know the infamous Tiger Theater. And I suspect many of the great films of the day came to that particular theater way back when. Meanwhile, the idea of having a very popular medieval movie is not unknown at all to us, because we think 1970, I know. And you say, that's quite a switch from 1952 to 1972, isn't it? But that's Zeffirelli. After Romeo and Juliet, he was just sure he was going to have another big hit. He did okay with that. I saw it at the Tower in Atlanta. The idea of Francis and Claire and we're just living the life, and we love the land, and we're real hip and all that. So, yeah, that was then. And so that was, I think that was fairly successful. There was, my own favorite, of course, was Alec Guinness as Pope Innocent III. But I don't think that I was probably in the majority on that, because St. Francis and those kind of characters were, I think, the real heroes, because they were like, oh, wow, man, we just want to live the life and all that. But I liked the Pope and surrounded by the cardinals. I thought that was kind of neat. But again, small minority. And it did pretty well, but not like Romeo and Juliet, of course. Now this, we love, of course, Peter O'Toole and Catherine Hepburn. I don't know if there were too many medieval movies that I felt like I needed a shower afterwards because everybody was so dirty, and they should be. Because everybody always says, wouldn't you like to go back and live in the Middle Ages? I said, no, no, no. I am too devoted to cleanliness. So yeah, you can be romantic all you want to, but give me my tub, okay? I want to bathe. And of course, less pleasantly, there is all the knocking about. I'll never forget the scene. I'll never forget it. When he knocks her down and she looks up and says, well, what do you expect? This is 1183 and we're still barbarians. And, you know, even back then, I think I felt a little uncomfortable about it. But of course, it's true that violence of men and women doesn't go on just today. It went on back then, too. But they were quite good, and there were other great performers in it. And I do think we do like kings and queens, even when they are not as in Camelot or something of that sort, because these folks certainly weren't. There was a lot of violence, and as I say, folks were really dirty, and so that's true to life, that's for sure, and they do have many, shall we say, issues with which to deal. If it wasn't exactly accurate historically, it was close enough for movie purposes. They weren't going to be quizzed on it. And of course, how popular was that? People still watch it. Students will still say to me even today, and I'm always impressed at a film that was made. Gosh, can you believe that was 23 years ago? But they will say to me, what do you think about it and all that? It had a great impact, especially among those, I suppose, of Scottish ancestry. Again, there's some serious questions about its historical accuracy. Again, you have to go and just eat your popcorn and just enjoy the movie and try not to get upset, and then go home and you can quibble and criticize. But it was very entertaining. A little violent, I warn you, but again, very, very entertaining. And the whole question of the Scots versus the English, can they ever get enough of it? I mean, it was very popular then, and it has remained so today. Now that we have determined that books and movies have had medieval themes and enjoyed great popularity, it's time to see who has set up this construct. And two of them will be very familiar to students of the Renaissance, because Petrarch, Machiavelli, and so forth lived in the Renaissance, but they wanted to live in the Roman Empire. I hate to say that. It sounds like they're disloyal somehow. I mean, I'm sure they loved their day and age in a way, but they were also very romantic about the past. The glories of the empire and that literature. If you had said Virgil or someone like that to them, of course they would have loved it, because that's something to do with Rome, the Romans. But the last 1,000 years, including their own time, dark, gloomy, ignorant. Basically, we'll never be as great. We can try. You'll give us a need for effort, but we will never reach that level. And that was the idea of the Renaissance. We can try, and the term Renaissance means rebirth. But it's not the same. It can't be the same, and we're sorry. but they were wonderful. And they expressed these views in their own writings. Petrarch, a poet, and a writer of epics, and of course Machiavelli writing histories, and that everybody's read, The Prince, and things like that. Now, we all know Martin Luther. Many of us have sung "A Mighty Fortress Is Our God" and knows much about Lutheranism. And you think, what's he got to do with the Middle Ages? Well, of course, he's one of his enemies, because his assumption is, yes, it was dark, and I might use a bad word now. It was damn dark. And you say, oh my. Yes, that's because, of course, Catholicism ruled. And guess what's happening now? Thanks to people like me, true Christian belief is returning. Not those Italians. They're not bringing you the truth. I'm going to bring the truth through the Bible. The idea then being that as long as Catholicism reigns supreme, we had trouble, big trouble, 1,000 years of darkness and trouble. But now, Luther, and I wish I'd had a Calvin shot for you so that I could complete that duo, and others. But again, the idea, they would not say, oh, well, let's look for roots of our theology, the harvest of medieval theology. Let's look for that in the early century. No, 9. Let's reject all of that and understand that our roots are with the early church, and it's been all downhill until now. And now I'm bringing it back. The real truth, but medieval, yuck. Okay? I mean, there's no question that with the Reformation, you have definitely anti-medieval. So if you'd come up to Luther and said, I want to say the Middle Ages, he would say, no. That's ridiculous. And I mean, the man's a scholar. He was a great scholar. He did the Bible and so forth. So did translations, German, hymn writer, and so forth. But he was certainly no friend of the Middle Ages. I decided to give equal time before I left out the Catholic Church, and I want to make sure that for Catholics everywhere, you will understand there's a different feeling about the Middle Ages. And as the Catholic Church has its own troubles in this period, you notice I mentioned, you have to think about the church of the time, 16th century, 17th century, and you're thinking, they got a lot of problems because they have to deal with, think of Galileo and all of that. That was trouble. And think about the Enlightenment when people are even criticizing organized religion altogether. And this is after Luther and Calvin, or they hope in a place of damnation. So the Catholics had plenty of troubles in that period, and they look back to the Middle Ages in a very positive way. So if you're wondering where people like me came from, it's probably from that whole tradition of Catholicism, which seeks to find something good in the Middle Ages. Maybe we look at it differently. I hope we do, but certainly from their point of view, the Middle Ages produces the Catholic Church in all of its glory. Therefore, there's a great reason for studying this with interest, approval, and no longer will we scorn it and say all these terrible things about it. Because remember, back in this day and age, there weren't a lot of people who were demanding, we want more medieval studies. No. I mean, let's face it. There were a lot of people who said, well, who would care about that? We love the Greeks, the Romans. Let's go on to the Renaissance. Yeah, that's good stuff. But that 1,000 years, cross that off my list. Now, it just gets worse when we think of people in the Enlightenment. The very idea of an enlightenment, and if you are to use that term, dark ages person, there's going to be a serious problem, because enlightened people say, we're tired of darkness. We want to be enlightened. And if we're enlightened, we reject all superstition. And let's face it, what was the Middle Ages? 1,000 years of it. Ignorance and superstition. And anybody who says to Voltaire, but look at the glories of the Catholic Church and all it contributed, I imagine they would get a big old laugh. Because Voltaire was no friend of Catholicism. And all the scholars of this period tend to look askance at organized religion and view all of that as just, who cares? We're moving on. Unlike the Renaissance people who were basically nostalgic, because we can never get the level of the Romans, the Enlightenment people felt they were going to be even greater than the Romans. So we're moving on. And that 1,000 years was unfortunate, and we're still fighting what it produced. So yeah, we have no friends yet. My people are a small group, fighting against opposition everywhere. This, of course, is the face of one of the great authorities. And maybe for special credit, if any of you all need extra points, and I think of one person at least who desperately needs more points. But I mean, if you were a B-plus type and want an A-, then you could read the entire decline and fall of the Roman Empire, and not the condensed version. No. Okay, put you on the honor system, that you would read all the volumes. The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, which was published first in 1776, believe it or not, was again the idea of the medieval period being a time of utter ignorance, barbarism, and superstition. And he spends many volumes describing it because, of course, he loved the Roman Empire, as many of us do. And to get to that, he had to show how truly dreadful the time after the Roman Empire was. And he proceeds to do this through the fall of Constantinople in 1453, and that takes a lot of volumes. And he spent his life working on this. He did. 1776 was just the first version, and he went on with this. Finally, now we come. Now, yes, the Council of Trent. The Catholic Church's response to the Protestants, bringing together church forces. And again, part of this was appreciating the Catholic past, and without denying that Catholicism needed to be reformed. I think anybody would know that. This council then would go back into their medieval roots and talk about, well, if you love St. Ignatius Loyola, as who wouldn't, then of course you would want to love St. Benedict or others of the great medieval monastic saints. If you love the popes of today, why wouldn't you love Leo and Gregory? Now, I don't know if the new people in our group have been told, at this time you are permitted a short period, and I mean short, period that you are allowed to leave. If you try to make an escape, there are guards with dogs that will bring you back if you want full credit for this course. So remember, 5 minutes, is that? 4 minutes, okay. I've already cut into your time, so you better move it. I'd go fast if I were you. Whether or not that was serious. You know, there was a big talk, and then I think Southern Union. What were you all going to be with? Phoenix City and Alex City? Oh, those? Oh, I never know about those community colleges, you know, and I always wonder what kind of schemes.
You wonder, Tennessee's got such a wide network of community colleges.
Yes, I mean, it's wonderful, and it's
You know,
wonderful.
the great thing is, a lot of my masters, they brought the teachers out from other universities to the community college, so I was able to just go locally and get most of the
Shoot.
from my master.
We do, oh, absolutely. We do it at Auburn. Yeah, bringing them back and wonderful opportunities that people would never have had before, right?
Have otherwise. I wasn't late. I'm the greeter. These two
Oh,
don't give me a bad look now. 'Cause
okay. If you're, okay, no tardy marks, though.
no, mark off the
No,
party.
no.
Okay, is there a textbook?
Oh, yeah. I talked about it. But not that you necessarily are concerned about being thrifty,
Well, no.
but you can get the 10th and save big bucks.
Oh, okay. I need to see what this is.
The 11th, you might have,
Judith, who's that?
Judith Bennett.
Judith Bennett.
It's an old book. I told them about it. It was originally written by Warren Hollister, and when he died, she took it over and she's rewritten it, you know, to keep up to date on ideas. You know how ideas change.
Yeah. Like that time in history changed. Just our view of it.
Oh, like one student said to me one time, I was following her out of class, and she said, well, it's all just the same stuff. Just a bunch of names and dates. I said, young lady, would you come to my office, please? And I said, if I were going to say things like that, I would make sure I didn't do it in front of the professor.
Who's devoted his life.
Yeah. So we had to talk about interpretations and all that.
Judith Bennett, medieval.
Yeah, it's on the syllabus. Did you not get the syllabus? They write out the. Frank, I'll tell Frank. Frank will know.
They must have run out. There wasn't one out there.
I wanted to tell you that not only did my daughter and my son, but all of their friends took you.
Oh,
And
is
so
that
when we told them that we were coming
That's
back
fun.
to school ourselves, they were just elated. So sometime when we have a class and it's not quite the first week, I'd like to take a picture with you. If it's
I'd
okay.
love to. That'd be fun, Wanda.
Send it to the
Yeah,
kids.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because they were saying, one of them is a dentist, and I go to him, and he was my daughter's friend. And when I told him that I was coming, and going to take your class, he said, "Now I want to retire, Miss Wanda." He said, "I am so envious, so I will."
Okay, thank you, Wanda. That's it. You didn't see the syllabus out there, or have they run out, or?
There may not have been enough. I'm a leftover from Frank's class, so I haven't gone.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask Frank when I see him, because I thought Barbara had run off enough, but you never know. I didn't know there were going to be this many.
Well, I have to tell you, when you mentioned Barbara Tubman's The Distant Mirror, she was a visiting professor where I was in school and was the most delightful person. And we would eat with her some evenings, and one girl spoke up one night and said, how do you decide to write your histories? It's so interesting. It's not dull, like and she said, I really focus on the biographical, like Emerson said, history is biography. And she said, I rewrote, in The Guns of August, I rewrote the chapter on Nicholas and Alexandra 8 times, trying to fit in one particular anecdote that didn't seem to work. She said, I finally got it on the 8th try.
God, that is amazing. Frank, are there any syllabi left, or?
Oh, goodness gracious.
Because, okay, if you would, because there's several people who ask. She, her writing is just a dream, isn't it? Just the writing. Barbara Tugman. I just love all of her books. She. Oh, no, I can't. No, I'm not touching that. That was so.
Left out an important,
Which one?
An important movie or movies.
Prince Valiant?
That taught all of us as kids what the Middle Ages was like, and that's Robin Hood. Robin Hood. Or Camelot.
Oh boy.
We thought Robin Hood was the Middle Ages.
Yeah. Oh, and King John and the wicked Sheriff of Nottingham. Oh, my Lord.
Did you make an announcement?
I can do that.
Syllabus are available out front.
Yeah, here are the syllabi. So Frank.
All available outside on the table. You don't get them now, you naughty.
So that you can get. But Frank will not permit you to have them now. I'm sorry. But yeah, rules are rules. Very strict. Oh, no. That's tantalizing to think they'll be waiting for you. That's excitement. But yeah, I know that some people did not get them beforehand and were unable to get the books. Or if you were not here at the beginning, and I did mention that 10th edition is available, I'm sure, in many, what do they say, popular locations. So on we go. I mentioned before the Council of Trent, the sort of, you might say, Catholic forces doing a sort of comeback. And again, to me, this sort of symbolizes that appreciation for the Middle Ages. I'm sure they were very nostalgic when there was no Luther, no Calvin. Yeah, all the divisions. And it was, of course, romanticized to make it seem like everybody was happy under the Pope and that sort of thing, yeah. So medieval has a part, and you say, well, what's a Bismarck doing here? Yeah. I'll tell you why, because we have nationalism. And just like Mel Gibson and the whole idea of that Scottish movie of 1995, Bismarck and others back in the 19th century symbolize an appreciation of the Middle Ages. Why? Because we've got some Germans, or we've got some English, or we've got some Scots, or we've got some French, whatever they may be. The reality is somewhat different, but that's okay. This is the 19th century, and it's another element of that interest in the Middle Ages. And before, people had expressed very little interest. And it's not merely Germans, as I say, it's Scots, it's English, French, whatever it may be. But they all want to see their roots in that medieval period. And it's after the Romans, and now our people come alive. So much for the Roman Empire. You know, we've moved on. We appreciate our nation. And we are the great ones. Jean-Jacques. Jean-Jacques appreciated the medieval for its romance. And again, a student came up to me. I have had, over the years, many interesting students. But she said she was a member of a medieval group. And we had a chapter here. I don't know if we still do, but there was a chapter. And you say, well, what's romantic about that? Well, it's romantic because they imagine themselves to be medieval. And you say, oh, so they're peasants. No, they far from it. Future farmers knew. They see themselves as kings and queens and knights. And yes, and I say, get real. I mean, come on. But this I blame on Rousseau to a certain extent, and other people who tend to look at the past through rose-colored glasses. Instead of people who have to deal with each other, when they talk about monasticism, they think of the bell and the choir and the singing and so forth. And there are plenty of medieval scenes which can seem very romantic and lovely if you want to make it that way. Undoubtedly, like some of you mentioned movies, or some of those ghastly novels you mentioned, yes, it can be very, and they will remain unmentioned because I don't think they are of the sort that we want to think of as being academic. But definitely, the romanticization makes it all the more popular. Sturdy, hardworking peasants, devoted kings and queens, pious popes, accompanied by a cast of devoted monks and such all around him, yes. Again, romantic, and very popular as period goes on. And of course, Rob Roy, Sir Walter Scott, more medieval romantic images. And Scotland seems a perfect place for medieval romanticism because, you know, they lost and they had troubles and weather could be a bit unpleasant. And all said, this became part of the medieval mystique, if you will. Nationalism, romanticism, and yes, despite the Presbyterians, it was Catholic until Knox and that crowd. But it changed. But over and over again, there's so many interesting parts that will create interest in the Middle Ages. Not just academic, but as I say, nationalism, religion, and romanticism. But I love this particular portrait of Sir Walter Scott. He's a very interesting man. And of course, someone mentioned Camelot, so we do, if there ever was, and I always poo-poo Sir King Arthur, making my students very unhappy with me. But you get the idea that this again is part of the romanticization. And it just occurred to me what that group was, in case you haven't thought. The Society for Creative Anachronisms. And that is super romantic, not a peasant in the bunch. But kings and queens and warriors and damsels in distress, I think they have all that. And I said, who's going to do all the picking and the plowing? You know, I worried a lot about that, and they had no answer and went away sadly, looking for my interest. But again, this business of the knights and courtly love became very important, I think many of you would agree, in literature. And who's to say whether it was really like that in their lives, but it certainly made for nice stories, which we do not take for reality. And the architecture, here's my own alma mater, and you will see a 19th century structure was built very much the way that they envisioned a medieval type building being. We always, when I took students at Oxford, one of the first things we would tell them was, this is lovely and this is Oxford, but this was Oxford as it was constructed in the 19th century, because somebody would come up and say, oh, this is so medieval. I said, 19th century medieval, you mean? Because it's like how we put this into our own modern thought pattern, which I think is kind of interesting when I examine buildings like that and where they got the idea for this particular one called All Saints Chapel. Now, how was it brought about? Well, we have the three elements, all of which will get their own day. But we start with the Romans, then we'll go to the Christians, and then the Germans. All three have great significance, and none will necessarily dominate the others. But it's, always hard to say, what do they say, everything in history comes in threes. It certainly would appear that these three elements are very strong. It's hard to separate them, although I'm sure at the time they would not have appreciated that, because they didn't consider themselves integrated and merged, and that's why it takes all these centuries to create a different civilization. So again, Roman, Christian, German. We'll see the territory, and you'll see it's partially Roman, but not altogether. It includes a lot that is Germanic. Christianity officially will be what we know as the Roman Catholic Church. But that gets a bit complicated given the nature of people, places, and belief systems. But here we have the three components. When somebody comes up and says, well, did they start off with, feudalism? And I say, indeed not. And the confusion of believing that a society comes ready-made, with preset institutions, and you just pull it all out and then put it together like, the night before Christmas. And then it's all laid out. We got the Middle Ages. It doesn't work that way, and as we will see, most of the institutions, like the manor, M-A-N-O-R, or feudal relationship, all of that evolves over time. There are no instant Middle Ages, in other words, with the society and the institutions. History is a process, if it's anything. It's to note also that there is no central clearinghouse so that we can get everything uniform. It's not like 1-800-feudalism. And so, because, from one part of Europe to the next. Now, is this the way it's supposed to work? And I have to explain, it depends on the area and the circumstances there. You try to make it simple, but you don't want to oversimplify, because then you're talking about something that's not real. In any event, it is very much a local society because, as we're going to see, it's mostly rural and agricultural. There's not a lot of places where things are happening, if you get my drift. I mean, if you want to go happening, I'd go to Constantinople and take Greek 101, because I don't think the West is going to be your place. Speaking of Constantinople, they, of course, claim to be the continuation of the Roman Empire, and they will continue to call themselves that, though history has called them the Byzantine Empire, and that's a decision of history. They did not know themselves by that term. They were the Roman Empire, and you say, but they speak Greek, they write Greek. I don't care. They were the continuing Roman Empire. And of course, the Muslims ruled over much of what had now, or had been, the Roman Empire. So now, both Muslim Arabs and Byzantines live in worlds that are more urban, more literate, more advanced, and we hate them both. But we need them, and we're heavily influenced by them. It's kind of interesting, isn't it, that the West is the needy one of the three, both culturally and economically, for that matter. But I just think that's interesting in passing, and that's why we spend some time on both of them. And as I've said, again, just to reiterate, you have the Western Roman territory and its lands, and we'll go into that. The Christians, by the 4th century, are a recognized, established, legalized religion, institution, and finally, the Germanic peoples coming in. So we start now by noting the Roman Empire. People ask me, how large is that? It's like the United States without Alaska and Hawaii, with about 50 million people. And you think about how many people we have today. Well, of course, back then they couldn't have fed all those folks. They were doing well to manage with what they had, if you think about it. As far as I'm aware, that's an empire that had or did the best job of bringing together that much land under the best conditions possible up to that point. And we're talking the first, second centuries after Christ, right about in that period when it enjoyed its heyday, the so-called Pax Romana. You will note what it does not include. It does not include Ireland. They are on their own. We notice that it does not include Scotland. The English tried, Lord knows they tried, but that's going to take, when the Romans in England, they finally reached a point and said, I think this is enough. And you'll see the same will be true in Northern Africa. I think they would have liked to have maybe gone further into the east if they could have, but a little something called Persia prevented that. And then as we move north, we have those famous bodies of water, the Rhine and the Danube, well known to certain members of the class. And so I suspect you will understand there are reasons for the Romans stopping where they did. What effect that must have had on them. You know, it's all great when you're dynamic and you're growing. And when you stop growing, I wonder if that sort of affects the Roman ethos. But whatever it is, this is how they stood at their greatest height in the 200s. And they enjoyed many successes. We call it the Mare Nostrum, in which the Roman Navy and economic interest dominated the Mediterranean Sea, and as a result, they went unchallenged. If you have or have had the section which dealt with the Romans, you will note that they put down their only opponent, the Carthaginians, and they completely ran matters in the West, politically and economically. And once they crushed that legacy of Alexander the Great, they made themselves the masters of that area, excluding what we call Iran. Didn't get that far, but they got pretty far. And all of these lands they brought together in what would be considered, I suppose, the greatest empire that has ever existed in those terms. Gibbon certainly thought so. And again, for a weekend project, you can work on that. What is interesting to me, though, is how much many of us talk about taking classes in the West this, and the West that. But when you stop and think about it, the West is the late bloomer. Western civilization did not really grow up until later times, because these earlier Hellenistic civilization, or even down south, the world of the Muslims, those worlds were advanced when the West was still in its developing stages. You know how we talk about developing peoples? Well, we were definitely developing in the West. But meanwhile, as far as the Romans were concerned, in that period of Roman peace, that was strong in this 2nd and 3rd centuries. And that's a long time, I think. You know, when you compare it to modern, I think you will agree that that is a long period to be able to create a civilization that holds together with fairly good situation. But they're not always total bliss. And I do want to mention the problems so that you're aware of them. This is not a course where we go into detail with this. They never figure out a way to get one emperor and then let him stay until he drops dead. And then we'll get the next one. No, we can never get it to work the right way. And we have lots of movies about it. Not good ones, but we have lots and lots of movies because they're always bloody and so forth. And you know how they like to kill each other off. Armies, oh yes. The military and the power of the military. Like any other empire, this has overly powerful generals, and we never have a succession system that works. We have terrible inflation. We have a population that isn't growing. Even as early as the first emperor, Caesar Augustus, they're trying to give awards for people who can be the fertile most often. You bring in a gazillion children, and all of that. They're so desperate for people to have more children. You know, those issues of fertility are fascinating, and it's very interesting that this was a time by the 4th century that the empire was having great trouble. And you know, if you don't have enough people, you don't have enough people to work. You're thinking of consumers, I bet, but I'm thinking of folks getting out there and doing something, hoeing and picking. Yeah, I mean, that's really the problem. It's just a decline in economy. They don't have enough people to work. They just don't have people to produce the crops. Well, of course, it is a slave-based society, and with the cities declining, most people who can afford to leave the cities behind. In the West, that's sad because that's about all there was to cities. See, cities had not really existed in the Roman Empire until the Romans put them there. And once the Romans decide, you know, there isn't that much going on, we probably don't need to have much there. That's the end of the city. It's not that way in the East. You can think of cities, Antioch, Jerusalem, Corinth. I mean, you know, read the Bible, they're in there. But not so much in the West. And most of the towns and cities have a tendency to drive. Well, what do the rest of us do then? You get out there and work because you want to eat tomorrow, don't you? You know, it's that kind of thing. It's a very, very sad situation. And most work is done on these great estates of the Lord's, which is very important for the future. Very, very bad. You mean in terms of, starvation, there was often famine. Because, I mean, the agriculture was extremely primitive. And if you couldn't, and in some places, if you couldn't import it, you were really in serious problems. So I'm sure that had a lot to do with a declining population because they just could not feed the people they had. It's really a very, very bad situation.
If those are today's scholars' analysis, did they match what Gibbon did in 1776? Did he almost...
With those causes?
Yeah.
Well, he said the triumph of religion and barbarism. Meaning, he didn't go into all, he would mostly concern, it's basically those blankety-blank Catholics. He blamed the Catholics and all their fighting about religion, which he thought wasn't worth a piffle, but he thought, you know, their doctrinaire squabbles, because the Germans are coming. And it's basically like the Romans, if the Romans had gotten themselves together and not worried so much about that Catholic Church, then they could have to the Germans. Triumph of religion and barbarism. Yeah, so that was his idea, and that's the old idea that they used to teach it that way in the schools. That is basically the Germans and the Catholics because of, and there's nothing wrong with the Catholic religion. It was the fighting about doctrine, because that can get people in a real stew. And we will talk about that in another lecture. And of course, again, the problems of the military, because the enemies of Rome will never stop, of course. Diocletian and Constantine are well known to many of us as being the authoritarian emperors who essentially created a government that would be strong and all-powerful. At least that's what they tried to do. And it looks good on paper, although you always ask yourself, I wonder in reality. You know, we have a lot more bureaucrats now to tell us how to run things. They wanted people to do things a certain way, but I just don't think they had enough people to make people do it. They tried, though, in their government. They tried to create 4 emperors. Diocletian would be the boss, of course, but he would put a buddy as co-emperor, and then 2 junior emperors called Caesars. The idea being now we solve the succession problem, because when Diocletian said, you know, I want to retire, and the Western emperor says, well, listen, we'll have a big party for you and we will all sing, have a great retirement. And Diocletian says, no, you're retiring also because I say you do. And that is something of a problem. But the idea is the 2 junior emperors will now step up and become emperors, and then we will now have a system of succession. You 2 guys who had been the junior emperors will choose 2 new junior emperors. You know, you'll check people's CVs, interview people, have them come in and then decide who are the best to be the junior emperors. It's wonderful on paper, but I'm not going to lie to you. It didn't work. I know you're not surprised, are you? Because, yeah. But that is what happens to so many of these problems. Diocletian will even try a wage and price freeze. Didn't work. But again, we understand that people have had many kinds of schemes like those to try to preserve what had been the Roman Empire. Constantine himself will give up. He'll go back and say, well, we thank Diocletian. It was a real good try, man. You did good. Diocletian's retired by now. He probably sent him a note, and he said, you know, I appreciate all your efforts. Everything was good, but it didn't work, so I'm going back. Got Junior here, and he's going to be little Constantine, and he'll be emperor when the old man dies. That is the idea then, folks, that many of these schemes that are quite written about by historians are not going to work because, in part, they had never worked in the past. They have no tradition of it. At the same time, they will increase bureaucracy. They will charge more money because everything's going to the military. I know you're probably thinking dental insurance, but no, they are thinking military, build up. One Roman emperor, I remember, said to his sons before he died, take care of the soldiers, and the rest will take care of themselves. And that's what it was all about. Most of the Roman emperors were veterans themselves. So they weren't born to the life of luxury and ease. They knew what it was to be tough. And these people put everything they had into the military. They tried to freeze prices. They tried a variety of steps to try to make the economy work. Even making bakers hereditary. I mean, you had to have your sons as bakers, or whatever the necessary job was. All in all, none of the solutions would be completely effective in terms of solving Rome's problems. And this will go on during Constantine's time. But this is the essential time of difference, of change. Diocletian to Constantine. We're talking late 3rd century and 4th century. That very critical time. That's the time when the Romans are going to experience a very new kind of empire. And that brings our second element, and that element being the Christian religion. We'll have an opportunity to talk more about the early Christians, but here simply to note that Diocletian had tried to destroy them through persecution because I think they annoyed him. He wanted to be the center of attention. He wanted to be the God. And I think there were Christians at his court who may have offended him in some way. We'll never know the whole story about why Diocletian got such an attitude about the Christians. Maybe it was his advisors. Whatever, he said, oh, okay, y'all go on your program then of persecution, wipe it out, and just put a report in on my desk when you finish that up. And then, of course, somebody comes to him a few months later and says, boss, it didn't work. I mean, we've worked on it. We've got a committee set up, an ad hoc committee to study the issues. Or he said, oh, forget it. I've got the Persians. I'd rather, go fight Persians or kill Germans or something. You all just really let me down on this. I'm going to fire the whole bunch of you. The Christians would later on try to make Diocletian into some sort of, monster, and you could just see bring me a Christian. But it was more to him just they were a nuisance. Go ahead.
Did he persecute other religious groups in the way?
No. It was the idea of there is no other religious group bothered him. The Jews, they were just the way they were. But Christians were upstarts in his view, and they didn't have a right to. And some of them were talking about the end of the world, and he wanted people to think about this world, and that really annoyed him. So Constantine, who came after Diocletian, was almost literally the answer to a prayer, because even though I could hardly say that Constantine was any expert on Christianity and who had very little background, his whole Christian reason is a rather odd business. But nevertheless, he becomes the first Christian emperor. And as such, he gets credit for saying the Christians can worship like anybody else. It is not true, and you'll get points taken off if you put it on a test, that he made Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire. No, he did not. All religions were allowed, but you can already tell by his decree that the Christians are going to get special privileges. You can see that. It's the only religion mentioned. But if you want to worship whatever, fill in the blank, you can, loser. You know, that kind of thing. So the rest of the 4th century, you can see, well, we're equal. Yeah, sure you are. And then, when all other religions are banned, surprise! No, there's no surprise at all. This has been centuries in the making, and you lost and we won. So, but that begins with his acceptance, and that's what makes it important. Now, I love the way that line is drawn between east and west, and you wonder, if you just crept over a little bit, is that going to be the people who are Catholic or Orthodox? Maybe we don't know this exactly, but all we can say is that the areas that are medieval are those towards the west, and we will see that even more as we turn to Christianity and the Germans in the next couple of weeks. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Thank you very much.